Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. My guest this evening is George Webb. George is an independent citizen, journalist, investigator who has been looking into, the Clinton emails, Podesta emails, and the Clinton Foundation. George, how are you doing this evening?
Great, Tim. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. And, well, I mean, you've been doing. I've been watching the series of videos that you've posted. There's been some important developments recently regarding Eric Braverman. Where is Eric Braverman and who killed Monica Peterson? What you've uncovered is a complex story of the inner workings of the Clinton Foundation and how it has been involved in. Well, it can be fairly described as a criminal enterprise. But apparently, what you've uncovered is sort of a criminal. Political network of various evildoers, yes, you could say, who make their money off fomenting wars, creating mayhem, and then buying resources on the cheap. Is that a fair description of what's going on here?
Yeah, it's a fair description. There is one little twist here in that the original Mena airport that Clinton set up to start the whole thing off, which was basically the Iran Contra, if people remember that, is, flying guns down to the Contras in Nicaragua and flying drugs back to Mena, Arkansas to pay for it. And that was set up by George Bush and Ollie North. So if under the banner of national security. So I truly believe to this day that all these machinations up till now have just been a kind of a replay of the Mena Airport operation, if you will. Mm-hmm. To this day, I believe Hillary believes she's doing this in the interest of national security. So a lot of people, say this is evil and terrible and horrible and so forth. And I have this kind of alternate theory that she truly believes when she goes to bed at night that it's national security that is why she's doing it.
So it's kind of like, I guess you could say, she's sort of a crackpot realist, I guess you could say.
Well, in the same way that Queen Elizabeth would have said, well, I need a spy network, and there's all these Catholics that have infiltrated us, and we need to get rid of them all, and, we need to have, these events that are contrived to, like the gunpowder plot to, get the population riled up to go after the Catholics. Yeah. That seems sort of kind of self-delusion, I guess.
Sort of, I guess you could say the reason of state excuse, sort of state security.
Exactly.
That old saw, yeah. Well, okay, you've started this research, I guess, sometime around was it October, November, and
October.
So it's a complex story, and it involves gun running, narcotics trafficking. A lot of intrigue, human trafficking, and possibly organ harvesting. Pretty sinister stuff. And how do you want to introduce your research in this area? What's the best way to go?
Well, what I do is I call it storyboarding. I had a long conversation today with Cy Hirsch, and he's the guy who broke the My Lai massacre and the CIA and FBI spying on, Vietnam protesters and all that sort of thing. And, he basically said, I'm a print guy. I'm a print journalist. And what YouTube has allowed is to take that journalism, which was kind of like a book journalism, like every 2 years I come out with a book, to this more what I call open media research, which is there's so many, it's kind of like having the New York Times, but it's an open source New York Times. It's crowdsourced New York Times. So I write an article, and then I have these contributors come back to me with all the supporting documentation, sources, and citations. And they say, that's right. So if I say, well, I believe there's organ harvesting going on in, let's say, the central part of Haiti, I'll get 50, or not 50 sometimes, I'll just get 10, but I'll get a lot of sources and citations that come back that support that. So it's this ever-building case. It's like a huge legal team, doing all this research, developing this case, and it's kind of a juggernaut in that sense. And it's not me. I'm just a stenographer. I always say that. It's these researchers who have so much in-depth insight and knowledge, And all I do is try to iteratively tell their story and summarize their story and storyboard what they do, what they say. And like I said, I'm a stenographer, I'm a storyboarder. And it's I think it's an amazing new form of journalism.
So you're aggregating the information, putting it all together, and presenting a narrative based on the evidence that you've been given.
Yeah, and the analogy would be if I was given a script of a movie, it would take me, maybe 4 or 5 hours to read the script if I'm an actor or whatever. But if I see a movie poster and I see the 5 actors and it says a couple of key lines, I get the gist of the movie. Casablanca, man lost, in Africa, trying to find his soul. Here's the beautiful woman. Here's the guy trying to get him his immigration papers, and there's the other guy trying to stop him. You get quickly, at a glance, what the gist of it is, without having to read the whole thing. And so that's what I try to do. Now, it's not that the supporting script isn't there behind the movie poster. It is. It is for every slide in my presentation. But in terms of understanding the news, it's a much better way of understanding these relationships rather than, just being told it's the Russians, ad nauseum, for 2 weeks. And you really don't get any additional understanding of what's actually going on.
Interesting. Now, you started the series, Where is Eric Braverman? Apparently he has appeared?
Yes.
Okay, so he's rematerialized, and he he's back on the scene. I think he's working for the Google. Is it the Google Eric Schmidt's foundation? Is that Google?
Yep.
Okay, so working at another foundation. Okay, he's a foundation guy. Okay, now I think anyone familiar with the deep state and the intrigues of the ruling elite know how foundations can be used and abused to further their interests at the expense of humanity, under the cover of philanthropy and charity. That's been the modus operandi, at least since the early 20th century. But this is the Clinton Foundation is a particularly egregious case here because the corruption is so blatant. It's pay for play. People die. Some people dying mysteriously. I guess the best way to go is Eric Braverman. What's his story? How did this all begin?
Well, it began with him kind of going to the press and saying, this is. I think it was the King of Morocco giving Hillary what amounted to I think it was $26 million bribe. His bribe was $12 million, but then there was a phosphate king of Morocco that also gave $60 million. So it amounted to a $28 million bribe. Well, the King of Morocco's history of human rights is just absolutely the worst. It's just off the charts. Decapitations. If you even say anything against the king, 10 years in prison. He's occupied Western Sahara, particularly depopulated the whole Western Sahara to put an oil pipeline and drilling and an LNG port in. So it's just one of those things that Braverman, teaching at the Jackson School of Business at Yale, a course called Ethics in Government. I think it was just like, I cannot do this anymore. I'm gone. And I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back for Braverman. He just said, I cannot do this anymore. And the Clinton Foundation had a huge confab in Morocco because of that donation to try to give legitimacy to the King of Morocco for the takeover of Western Sahara. And he just said, I just can't be a part of this.
And, of course, all this was occurring when Clinton was presiding as Secretary of State.
Well, the King of Morocco deal was a little bit later.
Okay.
Braverman comes in. So Braverman starts in this story when she is Secretary of State, and he sets up this Haiti Relief Fund when the earthquake happens at the first part of January of 2010. And so the Haiti thing happens, then Libya 2011, just generally here, Syria's 2012, and then Braverman comes in 2013. Braverman really comes in because Hillary's no longer in the State Department, so they need kind of a social justice cover, I guess is what I call it, to keep getting donations. Braverman didn't just join the story in 2013. He goes all the way back to 2010.
Okay. And well, here we have but then he's apparently in some of these WikiLeaks emails that were released, he is named as a possible source by John Podesta.
Yes, he is.
Okay.
I think it's the March 9th, 2015 email. What people at the Clinton Foundation don't realize, and the enemies of Hillary and Bill Clinton don't realize, is they have very strong friends in the FBI. And, the Edward Snowden disclosures where there's this dragnet sweeping of all phone calls and so forth. That has been going on since 1998, and even earlier with just wiretaps. But all of her political opponents and the people who work for her are under surveillance. So it was a very quick, what they call deep dive surveillance to go through all the people who worked at. Once they saw the article come out, the Ron Fournier article come out, they did a deep dive. Andrew McCabe, the assistant director of the FBI, did a deep dive and found out it was Eric Braverman. And so Braverman then is kind of on the run at that point,
And Andrew McCabe is the recipient of, didn't he get like a $675,000, or his wife did, who was running for political office?
His wife. Right? Yes, his wife was running for a very minor office, and they had one hot dog fry, and they put T-shirts on, and they took the picture. But for most intents and purposes, they bought their house in Virginia. And
who's the governor of Virginia?
Terry McAuliffe, who's been a 30-year friend of Bill Clinton's, and even McAuliffe, if you meet him at parties and so forth, he says, "Yeah, I'm the bag man for Bill Clinton." I mean, it's that obvious, It's like if Bill needs a check written, I carry his checkbook. So, and again, I don't want to, attack or anything the Clintons necessarily, other than I think the deep state that you mentioned, Tim, is really what's at play here. It's Kissinger, it's the Council on Foreign Relations that are kind of the guiding hand, and then Hillary's kind of the implementer, or George Bush was the implementer, or whoever is kind of the implementer of those policies,
Yeah, as she said, when she was commemorating CFR had opened up an office in Washington, D.C., and she said that now she doesn't have to go to New York to get her orders. She was...
That's very true.
Yeah,
moments.
Yeah, she laughed when she said it, but I don't think she was joking. I think it's all very true.
No,
history of
it's all very true.
Relations, yes. Okay, so in these several videos that you put up, you outline a few of the whether it's the rat line out of Libya into Syria, the arms shipments, the narcotics trafficking, the arms. Illegal arms shipments to foment civil wars in order to secure pipelines and disrupt, I guess you could say, certain countries. And also, it also allows for a very sinister yet lucrative human trafficking network. So where does revolution, civil war, arms shipments, narcotics trafficking, and human trafficking, how do they all intersect? Is it all part of the CFR, or is it Kissinger? What's going on here?
Well, there's an economic layer, and the economic strategists at that higher layer, the Bravermans and the Neil Browns. Neil Brown is at KKNR, and he's married to Eric Braverman. So these are kind of like I call them Kissinger's kids. They're deeply trained in petroleum or water pipelines and all these issues of the World Bank and USAID, and they're groomed. These are the stars. Bill Clinton was that person. Barack Obama was that person. They're counsel on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and so forth. Those folks don't really like to dirty their hands with worrying about all this. I drew the pipeline on the map, and it's a beautiful line, and I really don't want to know how the actual pipe gets laid. I don't want to know about sarin gas clearing the tribes and all the machinations and chicanery that goes on to make this stuff happen. And so they kind of are in the clouds. This is kind of this elite that everybody talks about. They're all Ivy League, and they have these nice dinners and stuff and parties at the Council on Foreign Relations. And then there's this other layer, which is kind of the David Petraeus layer. He's also a KKNR, but he's the war planner. And he goes out and gets guys like General Grange, who is an ex-Delta Force, Vietnam, Phoenix program. We're going to fly the tanks in here on the helicopters. We're going to do this. The Delta Force is going to come in there, and we're going to slice all these throats, and then we're going to laser target these things and blow these things up, So there's this kind of, layer or like insulating shade between the two layers that happen. And in my videos, I asked, does Braverman and Brown know that all this stuff happens? Do they know that, the ISIS has used sarin gas 52 times, to clear land for a rat line and a pipeline? Those kind of questions. And I really don't know the answer still to this day. 88 days in, I still don't know.
So the Clinton Foundation is more just it's a facility that's being used by these corrupt interests, the deep state, the financial elite, the financial interests, both the oil companies or Wall Street. And that might explain why, despite the Clinton Foundation's problems with its paperwork, its legal problems that have been detailed by Charles Ortel, there's been no investigation or effort to shut it down or to prosecute what is clearly fraud being committed at the Clinton Foundation. Is that a reasonable suspicion?
Yeah, but if you take my slightly alternate view that consider the Clinton Foundation like the Ford Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundation as a funnel to fund covert operations overseas. Okay? Let's just say that they are using the Clinton Foundation in the same way. Then Hillary is saying to herself, hey, I'm just executing. I'm just a funnel to execute foreign policy. It's not really me doing these bad things. It's these people at Council of Foreign Relations making these decisions. I'm just executing them. I'm just a better executor of the decisions than, somebody else. So, everybody, most of the folks on my site are, Hillary's evil, and I try to present a picture of more of this, more of this guiding hand of Kissinger, telling her kind of like, oh, let's try this here, let's do that there. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, it would kind of be the equivalent of blaming Clinton for the Mena, Arkansas operation when he was simply doing the bidding of higher powers at the time.
Yeah. If you look at the whole situation, Robert Rubin, who was later was Clinton's Treasury Secretary, he was at Goldman Sachs. He let out a whole bunch of bonds on the market for the Arkansas Development Financing Authority. And, all these people, they don't know, everybody's, municipal bonds is a great deal. You get a little bit higher return. Let's buy them. Who knows what they're doing in Arkansas? Well, this money would come in at, $100 million a month. So Hillary at the Rose Law Firm said, okay, look, anybody here who wants $1 million, you just need to pay me a $50,000 consulting fee to the Rose Law Firm, and I'll give you $1 million. You'll never have to repay your loan. So that's how that whole operation started. And, they had 12 years of that, and you would think that would be good money, and this is the whole junk bond thing where everything crashed later on. Mm-hmm. But then they added this Mena Airport thing, and that was also $100 million a month. So what you couldn't put $100 million in Hillary's account or Bill's account because it would be an obvious money laundering. They needed an account that could look realistic, that would fill up to $100 million in it. At the end of the month, the 31st day, they'd sweep it out to 10, offshore accounts, get it back down to zero, and let it grow back up. And that same kind of, whisk it out at the end of the month is used in Haiti. And the only thing you change is instead of the Arkansas Development Finance Authority is you just change the name to World Bank, and USAID is what's giving them the money. So the Clintons have this repeating pattern that you just see over and over. It's just like if you see some of these old movies done by, the horror movies that are really kind of cheap and cheesy, and then you see another one, you go, I know that movie. I know who did that.
Yes,
and somebody, I can't remember his name.
Yeah, it's all very formulaic. Is what you're saying?
Yeah, it's formulaic. And the Clintons are it's just you can see it from a mile away.
Yet there's no effort ever to really investigate it or prosecute the wrongdoing because the people who they're working for are too big to jail, more or less. They're the powers that be. So you're not going to get an honest investigation into these things.
If you look at Andrew McCabe, every time he's tried to shut the investigation down or carve it up into 5 little pieces or 6 little pieces or wall it off, he's gotten promoted. So, and if you look at James Comey during this whole cycle, this all goes back to, oh, by the way, the money that $100 million that the Clinton found that they were making at Arkansas Development Finance Corporation was going into 2 banks. One was in Georgia, the other was in Florida, and that was BCCI. That was being transferred to BCCI, which was Mark Rich's bank. So of course Bill Clinton pardons Mark Rich 18 years later. And we're still running Mark Rich type operations. You just changed the bank name from BCCI to HSBC. I mean, they almost don't even want to use new letters. It's still a 4-letter bank, and you only add 1 or 2 new letters. It's such a sparse, attempt to cover things up.
Yeah, and one of Bill Clinton's benefactors in Arkansas when he was running for president in 1992 was Jackson Stevens, who brokered the arrival of BCCI. So there's another connection there. Yeah, and that was that Georgia bank. Was that Burt Lance's bank, if I recall? Carter's?
I think that's right, yeah, Burt Lance.
Yeah, Burt Lance. And that was a mini scandal, but that's one of those scandals that were shut down. Never really went to the bottom because BCCI, I guess, was critical in the 80s because it helped finance a lot of the operations. Operation Cyclone in Afghanistan was a Pakistani bank that inevitably collapsed. So when it collapsed, brought down, I think he was retired at the time, but it exposed the criminal machinations of Clark Clifford, this old, this Washington, D.C., mainstay and a power broker who helped write the National Security Act, which formed the CIA, a banker.
I was just going to say, Clark Clifford goes all the way back to the birth of the CIA. That's
and that's the picture right there. What we're dealing with, this level of corruption, is so deep. I mean, it goes all the way to the top and then back to the CFR, because, of course, the Council of Foreign Relations, you could argue, they're the ones that came up with the idea of the Central Intelligence Agency because they wanted to formalize these incestuous relationships that Wall Street had with Washington, for decades, in the early part of the 20th century with the Spanish-American War, and the Rockefellers and National City Bank and all that stuff. So it was kind of like a consummation of this incestuous relationship when the CIA was created in 47, 48. But the career of Clark Clifford is a good illustration of how this works. That's true.
And what I love about history and your command, Tim, of the history is so good, is that you pick out just one person in this, and if you present the whole, galaxy of people that are involved, it just overwhelms you in complexity. But if you take somebody like that, Clark Clifford, who really wrote the whole plan, and you say Clark Clifford is the one who put Kissinger in Vietnam from his papers in Harvard in 1965 to run Operation Mongoose, to run, heroin from Laos over to the DMZ zone, and get GIs hooked on heroin to make money, so Israel would survive. I'm a moderate Zionist. I have to warn you. So I sometimes I have a little bit of you'll feel a little pride coming out. I'm not saying there's pride in getting GIs hooked on heroin, but I mean that gives you. I compare it to a submarine. If you're in a fishing village and all of a sudden a nuclear submarine, the Trident submarine comes up and surfaces beside you, and you've never seen, you've never been to, had television or anything, you're freaked out of your mind, right? And that is what I try to do is in my piece is this whole covert underground or underwater infrastructure of these covert operations. I try to slowly bring that submarine to the surface to not freak everybody out. It doesn't mean that that submarine doesn't exist. It doesn't mean there isn't nuclear submarines in the world. It just means that you have to, as a citizen journalist, just slowly show the layers so people go, oh, that's the conning tower. Oh, I see. Okay, and so people just don't get overwhelmed. And that's what I love about the Clark Clifford story, because it really shows the slow development of the CIA into these covert operations where they start thinking, hey, we can run this operation over here without the knowledge of the president. We can come in when the operation's over, like, let's say, the Guatemala coup in 1954, and just have a paper to say how it turned out and give it to the president, Eisenhower. Mm-hmm. And that's really how it. I really believe the Arbenz coup in '54 is really when they said, "Hey, this is our independent operation." And then Kennedy said, "I'm going to break into 1,000 pieces." That didn't turn out so far. The CIA, I'm going to break into 1,000 pieces. That didn't turn out well for Kennedy. And the only other blip on the radar was the Church Commission, and he died at 56 of cancer. And from then on, it was wheels up. The CIA has really been untouched. And now Trump says he wants to do reform. So this is really the third inflection point since Clark Clifford wrote those original papers to get the National Security Act passed.
And this is where we get into the sex angle, because blackmail is a big part of controlling the political process, neutering meaningful oversight, and also it is also a source of a lot of, like drugs, it's a source of black off-budget money to have these operations. I mean, huge proceeds will go to fund these operations that are off the books, so they don't have to answer any difficult questions in these things. This is where some of these banking scandals intersect with some of the sex scandals, like the Franklin scandal, because of course the Franklin Credit Union was implicated in Iran-Contra. And so, and the same thing. There was a book written back in 1992, I think 91, by Peter Bruton. He was a reporter for the Houston Post, I think, who had a book deal quashed from a major publisher. He had to do it from a smaller publisher called The CIA, George Bush, and the Mafia, about some of the, particularly in Texas, in the late 60s, 70s, and early 80s. And the savings and loan scandal and debacle was largely precipitated by these banks being pilfered by organized crime and the CIA to carry out these criminal operations. Much of it was the Central American thing with the Contra. So you could look at a lot of these savings and loans as little mini BCCCIs all over the country being pilfered, and then the taxpayers left.
Just like the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, you basically just give out loans for bribes, and then you crash the financial institution when it can't support itself anymore. But I do want to say one thing. This is kind of interesting. I'm always kind of sticking up for the CIA, and people don't like it. But if you watch the career of Allen Dulles, he's always imitating what the KGB is doing. The KGB gets the slip on him, but because he's got 10 to 50 times more resources than the USSR, he always overdoes it in the other way. And you said the sex angle. The Stalin and then Khrushchev have this Natasha program, and this Natasha program is, they make fun of it on the Boris and Natasha with the cartoon, the Bullwinkle thing. But these Natashas are, I guess the first one would have been the one that got the Enigma machine from the Polish scientist, the Polish mathematician, with the, making love on the tiger thing in front of the fire, the hearth, but they train these women to speak 12 languages and know all this about all these political circles and so forth. And because they had no resources, they had women, but they didn't have the resources to do all the covert operations and the flying of the planes and the caching of the weapons and all that stuff. Whereas the Dulles brothers were more into the Gladio type thing, where we're going to fly the people in, we're going to put the weapons all over, and then we're going to have a revolution one day. Well, they found out that all these guys, the head of the NATO and head of the German, every country in NATO was compromised by these Natashas, and they joked that they knew what was happening before their subordinates did, because they would have happened the night before, So that's where Alan Dulles goes into this MK Ultra, where he says we've got to have a similar capability. They don't quite have the know-how to cultivate a woman who was willing to do that for her country. So, maybe Valerie Plame might be the only person that came close to that. But they say drugs, if we drug them, so there's all this money spent on MK Ultra to, with the drugs and using the women to.
This is like George Hunter White and Operation Midnight Climax and these things.
Midnight Climax was one of the first ones, and that's where they started with these brownstone operations. Midnight Climax was one of the first ones, and all MK Ultra was how to use drugs, developed in Montreal at McGill. And Frank Olson was the guy who came up with an aerosol form of fentanyl. He came up with an aerosol form of propofol, and all that whole. So everyone thinks, George Bush is a horrible person because he did Franklin scandal. I think he was just kind of running with the Alan Dulles playbook. This is how it's done. We go into a country, we compromise everybody, we get everybody on film, and then we do business.
Now, when you say brownstone operation, I guess that's referring to a brownstone mansion or a townhouse where you have parties, right? This is sort of like a manual or a model that the intelligence services have, particularly CIA has. I think you described it as how someone with $10,000 can go into a country, and if he follows this plan, within a decade, he can have control of the political system in that country.
Yeah, what I do is that and these were run by Jeff Epstein in New York, and I've reported on it way back in 2002, 2003, and I gave a lot of information to Paul Rodriguez of the Washington Times about it at that time. He never ran the story, but basically, you come to the party. It's all the top people. Trump would come to these parties. He'd be there for like 5 minutes. He'd have some new model. He'd shake a hand. He'd get his picture taken by 50 reporters, and then he would leave. But the party has a beginning, and a middle, and an end. And the middle is everybody glad handing and picture taking, and then there's the hors d'oeuvres in the middle, and then the waitresses come out in lascivious clothing, and both men and women, and the people that are offended leave, and then the targets are left over, and they're all filmed. I mean, I'm talking 12 cameras, low light, every possible angle you can think of. And then they always have a teddy bear or some kind of weird art. You see this in the Podesta thing. There's always this weird art. And Jeffrey Epstein's places all had weird art. You just, right before a major vote in the Congress, like NDAA, you send them a picture of the teddy bear. You send them a picture of the weird art.
Or Obamacare, right?
Or Obamacare.
When the Supreme Court is about to render a decision, right? That's been the rumor. Yeah.
Yeah. It works for judges, too, yeah.
Yeah, that's very similar to what was described by both Henry Vincent and Nick Bryant regarding the Franklin scandal. Craig Spence's operation in Washington, D.C. seems to be a brownstone operation.
Yep. Barney Franklin, Craig Spence was a CIA guy, but Barney Franklin ran one, D.C. Madam 1, D.C. Madam 2. Jack Ramsey's ran one in Boulder, the Second Mile with, what's his name? Sandusky was one.
That's another investigation that was quashed, shut down.
Yeah.
And it's also very similar to the Marc Dutroux affair in Belgium, which probably is a NATO operation, right?
All those NATO operations were run by Tyler Drumheller, who was with Sid Blumenthal and Osprey Global, General Grange. All those operations was valid. Now, I want to say something about Valerie Plame. She wasn't just a sex kitten or whatever. She didn't really know too much. She knew the generals were being compromised, but she was getting them to the party, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of innuendo and teasing, and then there were other, girls that were being used to, get them on film.
Yeah, most people know her through her work with the CIA front Brewster Jennings and her efforts supposedly in counterproliferation, or there's probably more intrigue to that too. But you're saying she was involved in compromising foreign, political officials, the military men.
Early days, the early 90s. She was what was known. She did the brownstone stuff, and then she was brought back to Washington, and she went through this extensive training, which is called a non-official covert officer, or it's called a NOC. And I mean, they go through a year of intensive training where you have all these different people training you in French and the oil business and everything, so that when you walk into a major oil conference, which is what they retrained her to do, you know everything. You speak, and plus she's a very beautiful woman and so forth. So she goes back to Europe and goes back to Turkey and Iraq and becomes this kind of super spy. And her husband, Joe Wilson, is also a NOC. He was there. He's quite a bit older, I think 13, 14 years older. And he was the original, they're economic spies, basically. Yeah. They're economic spies.
And this sort of, economic or corporate espionage is I would say it's probably more in tune with the CIA's real mission than opposed to this sort of state-to-state espionage stuff, because the CIA has always been it's a corporatist intelligence agency. It's there to do the bidding of multinational corporations, the Anglo-American corporations, the Western banking interests, and things like that. So it's not there to fight Ruskies or to fight bad guys. It's there to engage in these sort of things. And this involves, the big thing, like I said, this involves some of these sex traps, which is why when we hear some of these stories, some of these salacious reports, whether it's the so-called Pizzagate scandal, or the call boy thing in the late 80s in the White House with the Reagan-Bush administration, these things are all intelligence operations, blackmail and bribery and blackmail. Yeah. So
I always say when you're talking about economic spying versus state spying, I think there's a balance there, and I think it changes over time. I think it's about 70, like you said, 70% economic spying, about 30% national security, because it's kind of like one hand washes the other. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it goes 60-40, but it's always tilted, I would agree with you, in the economic spying more often. But yeah, so all these ritual things and so forth that they talk about with the satanic and so forth, that's just to get the useful pawns to do what you want them to do. But at the higher levels, they're not satanic and whatnot. They're running an operation. And like Bohemian Grove, you saw the, General Powell saying, hey, you can come to Bohemian Grove, and you get there, and it's a kind of a 3-week indoctrination process to get people to the final where, there's a mock execution of, some sex slave, Yeah. I don't really think they kill the sex slave. But everyone there thinks he's been killed. So now you're bound, to secrecy, when the NDAA vote comes up,
Yeah, and there's always been an exploitation of satanic groups and cults by intelligence agencies, because these are assets that the agencies can use to run drugs, to do a lot of the dirty stuff. At the same time, the agencies can keep an arm's length from them. I think that was suggested by FBI agent Ted Gunderson regarding the Jeffrey McDonald case.
Case.
Yeah, because that was. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, and the jury's still out in my mind whether Jeffrey McDonald was guilty or not. His family certainly wasn't guilty, and they killed their whole family, his whole family. and they were trying to develop that helter-skelter meme. So
Yeah.
anytime they had one of these operations go wrong, the cleaner, the Harvey Keitel type cleaner, is we got to come up with something. Well, we can do mass shooter. No, let's not do mass shooter. Let's do cult killers. Okay, let's do cult killers, and I call it the blood on the wall. They have to write something in blood on the wall so the press, reports on that. And these are just memes, that they come up with, to clean. It's a cleaning operation when they're done.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey McDonald certainly was if the Jeffrey McDonald case was, if people don't know, there was dead GIs. This is horrible for families that have lost somebody as a GI, but they were putting, drugs, cocaine and heroin, into the body cavities of dead soldiers. And then in these body bags, people, when they see that come through on the aircraft and so forth, they don't inspect that. They have a respect for the dead GI. And so they were coming into Fort Bragg, and they had this kind of satanic cult, like you mentioned, that was pulling these, vials of heroin, and it was a big drug traffic operation at Fort Bragg. And the only question I still don't know is, did Jeff know about it or didn't he?
Yeah. And that's another angle there. No, another example is the Finders case, where another cult, a sex cult, that was apparently exploiting children, was exposed in Florida. The investigation led up to Washington, D.C. There was an office and a warehouse with all types of state-of-the-art telecommunication equipment, also mixed with satanic paraphernalia, pedophilia, and it was quashed under the excuse of national security by the Central Intelligence Agency, which suggested that this is another one of these, procuring programs, blackmail and stuff. And it's an example of the agency using a cult to do the dirty work, to deliver the bodies where they want to be. That's some, a lot of evidence to suggest that was going on with the Finders case. The big tell is when it's shut down under the reasons of national security.
Yeah.
And that's the big tell. That's, and it appears that's the same thing with the Franken scandal, where, the accusers went to jail for perjury because she didn't recant, and then many people turned up dead, like Gary Caradori, the chief investigator, prosecutor, who was playing bloop in midair. The evidence went missing. These are tell that higher ups this involves higher ups, and they've obviously called out the jackals to tidy things up a bit. But
yeah.
In your talk, you detail, basically you get the idea, you get the impression that certain interests are making a lot of money off mayhem, natural disasters, civil wars. You focus on Haiti. We can look at Libya and Syria. In Syria, both Syria and Haiti, according to your investigations, are a big part of this human trafficking and organ harvesting. Do you want to get us into the details of because that's particularly disturbing, but somehow the problem here is that war and suffering has become a profit center from a class of people who look at humanity as livestock to be harvested. That's what it looks like to me. Do you want to get into some of the details here?
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head, Tim. It's if you look at Haiti, it's divided into three parts. There's the part to the north, which is kind of the not very populated, and then there's the middle, which is even less populated, which is kind of there's three mountain ranges. So or two big mountain ranges that makes the three parts of Haiti. Haiti's the big horseshoe, you see in the maps. The middle part is hardly any population at all, and then most of the population is down in the south by Port-au-Prince. Okay, just to give your listeners a sense. And what's happening in Haiti is the wealthy class, the kind of the ruling class, is all the USAID money, all the Clinton Foundation, and all the State Department money went into the north part of Haiti. They built a new international airport. They built a huge new container shipping center. oil shipping dock. They're building another one for the commercial class over in Cape Hattian. They built also a prison, but the State Department built a prison for them. They also built, this new university. And it's all way, way, way far away from where the epicenter of the earthquake was. So you'd think, all this aid money going into Haiti, but nobody reported it, and it all went into the center of Haiti, or in the north of Haiti. Down in the south, the only thing they built was a hotel, a big hotel, and it hosted this company called Digicel. And Digicel, if people don't know, is, I think, an 88% monopoly of Haitians, because they gave away the cell phone. They were through USAID, and they have this application on there for microfinancing. Well, microfinancing sounds good. It's the mother who wants to get a sewing machine so that she can put her kids through college rather than working at the sweatshop all day. Well, it turns out that the interest, it's worse than payday loans. It goes up to 195%. So you actually have people giving a kidney, because you live on one, to pay the interest on their loans. And this goes all the way back to this guy named Eunice in 1974. And you're going to find Carlos Slim with his Telcel monopoly of South America and Central America and the Caribbean is also doing microfinancing loans. Every time you get into this kidney for paying interest, this, I call it micro sharking, like for microfinance loan sharking. As soon as you see micro sharking, the next thing you see is organ harvesting. And what I mean by that is in the central part. So what's happening in Haiti is the rich are up in the north, the poor are in the south, and this middle area is where you put your UN peacekeepers. It's your neutral area. And that's where you're going to see your forced vaccinations for clinical trials for drugs. So, in Haiti, for instance, that's where the original clinical trials were for the birth control pills, and then Depo-Provera, and just every drug that's used in the United States is first, trialed in Haiti. And this general who ran the invasion of Libya is one of the people that's also on this board of this drug company doing these clinical trials, this General Grange. So when you bring in these peacekeepers from Nepal, they don't speak the language. They're there. The way you make those soldiers happy is you give them the sex trade. So there's a lot of sexual trafficking. They end up doing a lot of experimentation with these drug trials to see what the toxicity levels are. So then you have people dying from that. They harvest the organs from the people who die in the drug trials. So their kidneys may be shot, their livers may be shot from the over-drugging, but their hearts are still okay. So you see this kind of organ harvesting going on from these drug trials gone wrong, and you see the same thing in conflict zones. And this corporation that teaches these police that all around the world called DynCorp, DynCorp, is running these operations all around the world. And it's kind of a play on words like dying corpse, DynCorp.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost like a CIA wink. I mean, DynCorp is the CIA. It's just this front organization to teach these UN peacekeepers to come in as police and run these sex trafficking operations. So in Syria, for instance, this can be the white helmets.
Yes.
They get kids out of the dust. The CNN takes their picture and puts them on the ambulance or whatever. And the cute kids go to UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, to princess houses to be 6-year-old brides.
And the important thing is you have to have a country that's been destabilized, that's been fractured by war, civil war, been bombed out. The people are desperate. So it's easy to exploit them because they have very little choice. Their options are very narrow at that point. And also, if you kill off their family, you have a bunch of orphans you can exploit.
And that MO or that pattern, it repeats itself over and over and over. You know, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya. There's a huge sex trafficking or child exploitation through Malta. And the way it works is the models, you know, the beautiful of the beautiful, get kind of, the cream gets kind of culled off the top, and those are the ones that go to Jeffrey Epstein's island in the Caribbean. Those are the ones that are kind of marketed to the elite of, you know, Europe and the elite of the United States. Then the rest, you know, go on for the, you know, the regular trafficking, and then there's this kind of like the way a barrel of oil is, you know, kind of refined is the same thing. It's the science of it has been refined down to, you know, here's the, you know, the cream goes here, the milk goes here, the chaff goes here.
Yeah. And well, I mean, if you look at these resource wars that are being waged by the by the Anglo-American Empire, I guess you could say, the West, to extract resources on the cheap by waging war, making the taxpayers pay for the war, or the drug money pay for the war, then the corporations come in and it's a way to socialize your risk and privatize your profits. That's what the Central Intelligence Agency really, and other intelligence agencies are really good for. They socialize the risk and make sure that the profits are privatized. But you're after the resources. You're after whether it's the rare earth metals, agricultural land, aquifers, natural gas, petroleum, whatever. Of course, the ultimate resource is human resource. That's a disturbing term, but it's true, human resource. And they look at it as a human resource. That's a sort of a technocratic term. It's, I mean, if you look throughout war, what do? In war, you kill the men and you sell the women and children off into slavery. You know, that goes back in the antiquity. It's just being continued today, just under cover of humanitarian intervention and, you know, peacekeeping and these things. It's war, nonetheless. But again, these people are, these human beings are there to be exploited, and more or less whatever value or wealth they have that can be extracted. That could be through cheap labor, being forced into a sweatshop because you've been forced off your ancestral homelands, or you can be sold into the sex trade. And judging on what your physical attributes are, you're going to go to, you know, you can be sold off at a higher price to go to end up at a, you know, whether what you look like will determine whether or not you end up, you know, servicing a soldier in Haiti, working for the UN, or you end up at a eyes wide shut party or something like that. Is that correct? Is that a good way to put it?
I think that's a great way to put it. And if you, I mean, I hate to put it in these terms, but if you go back to, I mean, Christopher Columbus first discovered Hispaniola, which is Haiti, and he first, you know, Africans were first brought to Haiti. And if you look at the American slave trade, it was exactly that. And that's how, I mean, I don't mean to speak in these crass terms because I know it's so hurtful to African Americans now, but I think they also would, you know, the scholars, you know, would say this is true, that the beautiful of the beautiful were first marketed, and then you know, and they moved along, you know, as far as their, you know, their auction, you know, docket was concerned. And the same thing is happening. It's only under a social justice cover. You know, if you look at the Clintons and how they handled this, they brought in Sean Penn, they brought in the model Nemkova, you know, the gal who was in the 2004 tsunami, you know, the story of holding onto the coconut tree as was swept away, which is anyway. She's very close to the Clinton Foundation, and then they have her have a, you know, she's the, you know, one of the elite, and I think she's from one of the conflicts as well. I think she's from either the Bosnia or the Kosovo. So it's she ends up with the premier of Haiti. She first is with Sean Penn, but then she's later, you know, paired up with this guy from Haiti, this popular singer that Martelli is the American pronunciation. So they come in and they have this kind of celebrity social justice kind of panache, and the media just, you know, thousands of cameras because they're all beautiful people, and everyone thinks, well, they did great for Haiti, you know. And this is what Braverman, and this is why I kind of stick up for Braverman a little bit. He was going to be the guy who was going to go in and actually put in these, you know, procedures to actually see if the money actually got to where it should be. And, you know, if you talk to the people in Haiti right now, I mean, I talked to the lawyer of Aristide, you know, who was the, you know, the president of, or premier of Haiti prime minister of Haiti for three different times today and, you know, all this week. She says, you know, 2% to 5% got through of the money that was given. Some people say it's as high as 10%, but I have never heard anybody say over 10% of the money donated got through. But people say, oh, Sean Penn was here, Nemkova was here, Martilly, he's a great singer, he's a great dancer, he's a premier, president. Of this, who is a part of the Clinton Foundation. He's a movie maker. He owns Lionsgate Films, and Jeff Skoll is the and he's in.
I'm sorry, you broke up.
Skoll.
Who was that? Was it Joyster or something? Joyster?
It's Guistra. He's the owner or lead shareholder of Lionsgate Films.
They did the Hunger Games and things like that.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the Hunger Games, because if you listen to Kathy O'Brien, who was a kind of a sex slave victim,
yes.
She talks of a very much like a Hunger Games scenario where she's naked and they give her a pair of shoes and then they say start running, and then all these guys start running after her. You know, they give her whatever, a minute lead or whatever, and it's very much a Hunger Games scenario. If you look there's another movie that Lionsgate did called The Hostel, where when they find a girl, they start bidding electronically amongst a bunch of brokers. And that's very chilling as well, because it's very chilling in the sense that that's the Malta. There's a kind of a Malta connection. These Knights of Malta. It's a very small little island, but they can give away diplomatic passports, so you don't have to be intercepted when you travel internationally. And they have this little kind of bidding ring that they run. So it's very much like Eyes Wide Shut, as a matter of fact.
There's also, I think, the first Taken, with Liam Neeson.
First Taken.
Yeah.
Yep.
Was involving, I think this was Albanian human traffickers, if I recall, from the movie.
Yep.
So, yeah. But, so, I mean, in Haiti itself, now there's been some suspicion that Haiti itself was targeted, even to the point that the earthquake itself was manufactured. Well,
you're getting into what people would call, conspiracy theory, but the idea of a peaceful nuclear explosion, or a PNE, and I'm not necessarily saying I believe in PNEs, but you look at the old Soviet Union, they had 725 of those during their oil exploration days. So it was quite common to put a deeply buried explosive device near a fault line and kind of set off the explosion to see what happened.
My name is S.M. Gibson, and I am the host of Anti-Media Radio